we're going to graph this function right here. It's a sine graph, and sine graphs, just before we even start, a sine graph looks like this. It kind of looks like an S. All right, now my midline, my M. Well, my midline is what you add at the end, and since nothing's at the end, my midline is y equals 0. All right, my amplitude is a number in front. It's your vertical stretch, so this amplitude is 2. And my period for this one is based upon this 3. Now, it's not 3. The period of sine is 2 pi. That 3 is going to adjust your period. So we take 2 pi and we divide by the 3. So my period is 2 pi over 3, or 2/3 of pi, because you cannot reduce this. So we're going to sketch this. First thing I want to do is always sketch the midline. So the midline of this, well, since the midline is at 0, what that means is my midline is just smack through the x-axis, right there on the x-axis. All right, so, okay, let's now do our period. So let's put a line here at the end and call that our period, one cycle. And our period is labeled as 2 pi over 3. So we're just going to label that edge, or the end of our cycle. And then we're going to go halfway between, put a line, and we put half of 2 pi over 3, which is just 1/3 of pi. So we now took the midline, we drew it in. We took the period and kind of marked it out. And now we want to take and do the amplitude. And if you look at the amplitude, it's 2. So what that means is the graph from this midline is going to go up 2 and down 2. So you're going to go up 2, and then you're going to go down 2. Now, if you want to, you could put the increments in the middle, if you want. But that's what's happening. You're going to go up 2, down 2, up 2, down 2, within 2 pi over 3. So now we got to sketch the graph. And as I said here, your graph kind of has this look. If you can't remember it has this look, well, let's plug in 0. What is sine of 0? Well, sine at 0, because that would make that a 0 here, is always equal to 0. So it's going to start here at 0, and if it's a period, it's going to end back where it started. So it always ends where it starts. And for sine, halfway through, it repeats itself. It kind of hits back at 0. Now next, for sine, halfway through, right here and right here, there are some key dots we're looking for. And halfway through these two dots, it's either going to go up the amplitude or down the amplitude. If you think about the unit circle, what happens is it goes up, and then later it goes down. The y values do. So what you would think about for the y values would be up here at 2, and then here in the middle, on the next one, you're going to be down at 2. So your graph halfway between is going to go up 2, and halfway between these, you're going to go down 2. These are the 5 dots you want for graphing sine. And now we sketch the graph through it. And it will look like a sine graph. And that is one simple cycle. And then it repeats and repeats. But that is one cycle with a midline of 0, an amplitude of 2, a period of 2 pi over 3. So we're going to graph this function right here. First thing we're going to do is map it out. So midline. Well, my midline is right there, so it's y equals -1. My amplitude is right here in front, so that would be, oh, it's not -1, I just messed up. It's 1, but you have to realize it's going to be flipped. The flip is just telling us, okay, remind us, this graph's going to be upside down. The amplitude is the 1. It's not a -1, it's a 1, but it's going to be upside down. Lastly, well, there's this pi right here. We use that to find our period. So our period's always 2 pi divided by b. And when I finish that, this cancels. It leaves you 2. So my period is 2. Alrighty, now that we mapped it out, let's first draw the midline. And let's think about it. Our amplitude is going to be 1. So we're going to start at -1, and we're going to be going up and down 1. That's important to think about when we kind of write this out, but what you're going to notice is we're going to start with our midline of -1. So I'll call -1 right here. So I'm going to say my midline, that right there, oops, let me go back. That right there is -1. All right? Now, that's the midline, the middle of my graph. Next, I want to put my period. So I'm going to put a marking out here somewhere. Doesn't matter where it's at, just put a marking, and that will be our end of our period. And our period is labeled as 2, according to my map. Halfway between those is 1. Now, you're not putting 1 and 2 on the midline. That's just, but would it help to mark those on the midline? Yes. It's going to be helpful to mark your midline, but it's really, you're labeling it on the x-axis. Okay. Next, before we start applying the amplitude, let's put some dots. A sine graph looks like an S, but since it's a negative sine graph, instead of going up first, it's going to go down like that first. So it looks like an S, but it goes down and then goes back up. So we're going to start here at 0, so that means we're going to end at 0, and sine always hits smack in the middle. It hits 3 times. And your amplitude is 1, so aren't you going to be going down to -2 and then back up to 0? Because if you're going to go up and down 1 around that, according to my amplitude. So halfway between these, so halfway here and halfway here, how do we decide where we're going? Well, what you'll notice is, according to my picture, aren't we going to go down 1 and then up 1? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down 1 right there between 0 and 1, and I'm going to go up 1 between 1 and 2. And I get my sine graph, which, oops, that kind of looks like this, doesn't it? A sine graph that's upside down should go down, then back up. Our midline is correct. Our period is correct. Our amplitude up and down is correct. We're all good. There is your graph.